Good morning, everyone. If I could have your attention, please. We're going to get the program started. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the last Public Policy Breakfast with Legislators of 2010. I'm Andy Johnston, Director of Legislative Affairs for the Grand Rapids Chamber and your MC for this event. I'm going to kick things off by bringing our hosts up to the podium to give a few brief remarks. And at this time, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. David Eisler from Ferris State University.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to welcome you here this morning. And it's great to have our legislators and the people running for office with us. I know firsthand how much effort they place into the campaign, and we're truly fortunate to have public citizens who are willing to expend this much of their life and their energy in getting elected. We're delighted to welcome you here. This is a great partnership between Grand Rapids Community College and Ferris State University. In this particular building, we teach nearly 1,900 students every day that are community college students from Grand Rapids. It's a wonderful partnership where students who get their associate's degree at Grand Rapids Community College could come right to Ferris and finish their degree with us. And there's no better partners for us than Grand Rapids Community College, and it's my honor to introduce their president, Stephen Ender.
Good morning. Thank you, David. Wow. Up and going. Now, this has been going on now for several months, these early morning breakfasts. The good news is you guys got 8 days to go, and then you get to sleep in for a couple of days. It's also my pleasure to welcome you to our campus. Really want to build on what David was saying, and I think it's important for folks in the legislature to know the partnership that we have with Ferris encompasses 30 different programs where our students will study with us for 2 years and then 2 with Ferris here, or 3 years with us and 1 with Ferris. What I love about that is how we can leverage our resources and our talent from the front end of building curriculum to the actual sharing of space, equipment, and buildings, and in some cases mortgages, as is the case with this building. So it's a great partnership. It's something I think that we should promote across this great state as we look to leverage all of our precious resources. This would be a model that I would really hope that you would want to explore. I wish you all great success next Tuesday. I'm anxious to hear your comments this morning, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Grand Rapids Community College. Thank you.
And thank you again to Ferris State and Grand Rapids Community College for hosting today. At this time, I'd like to invite our elected officials to the front for the panel discussion. I know Representative Schmidt was just getting his breakfast, but I don't know if you want to bring that up with you. I know that we also had a few issues in getting here today between power outages and the fix on I-196, so we may have a couple other legislators joining us, but we're going to get underway. If you've been here before, you know that this is intended to be an interactive discussion, kind of the town hall format. So as usual, I have a list of questions. I don't want to ask them all. So I hope that you're going to be brave enough to ask a question today of your elected officials. Just raise your hand and I'll do my best. And if I don't see you, just holler and we can bring a mic out to you. I'd like to introduce our elected officials with us today. We have from my left to my right. Sorry, I got to do this because I went to Michigan State, but we are in the top 5, or number 5 right now, so at least Michigan's top 10 in something. From my left to right, we have Representative Schmidt from Grand Rapids, Representative Pierce, Representative Darwin Boer, and then to my right, Senator Wayne Kuipers and Senator Mark Jansen. So as Dr. Ender mentioned, we're just about a week away from these elections, and then after that comes what could potentially be maybe the lamest of lame duck sessions. We have a number of term-limited legislators. Just want to open it up to the panel with the first question. What do you hope to see accomplished in this upcoming lame duck session, if anything? I'll open that up. Any priorities you'd like to see accomplished? Senator Kuipers is smiling.
Is this on? Yep. Senator Mark Jansen. One thing, we have to override a veto on some of the private providers for some of our DHS folks. There was an increase to kind of cover some of the lawsuit issues, and so that's one thing that I think we're going to have to deal with.
Representative Boer.
Yes, can you hear me back there? All right. All right, I think the school, $316 million, we're going to deal with that when we get back there. So I think that our schools are waiting to see what happens there.
School funding, DHS. Anybody else have a priority they'd like to see done? Representative Schmidt?
Well, it probably isn't a big priority with a lot of people, but I sit on transportation along with Representative Pierce, and thank you. Yeah, I hope that we take up the issue of the gas tax. Our transportation, I don't have to tell you how our roads are, but the jobs and the fallout from not providing enough money for transportation is going to put Michigan, from my perspective, down a cycle. So I hope we take that up. We should have taken it up before the election, but as usual, we don't take up those tough issues. We wait, and I hope that we seriously consider raising that to keep jobs and keep transportation solid in Michigan.
Representative Pierce, any comments on that? Maybe transportation funding for lame duck session?
Well, first of all, good morning. I'm what's left of Tom Pierce. We only have about 2 months left, and then term limits take me out, or I'm released from prison, however you want to look at that. To answer your original question, and that is, what would you like to see done during lame duck? My first response is as little as possible. I think most of what happens in lame duck happens so fast, and I've learned over the years that I've been there that when we do legislation quickly, the first thing you ought to be is afraid, because when it isn't vetted as it should be, you can end up with legislation that is very scary. Saying that, though, back to the transportation issue, I actually have a small solution. It isn't a full solution, but it's a step, I believe, in the right direction. A bill that hopefully I'll get taken up during these last few days in session. You may remember back in the early 2000s, some of my colleagues here decided to vote for a lifetime transportation or trailer plate here in the state of Michigan. It was a solution at that point that gave us a 1-year bump in the dollars available. But after that 1 year, it dropped the amount of revenue that we were receiving on an annual basis. One of the main reasons that it dropped is that most of the commercial trailers in the state of Michigan were going out of the state of Michigan to license their trailers. It was simply more cost than they wanted to spend for a lifetime on a commercial trailer that isn't that long. So my bill, what it would do, and I've talked with some of my colleagues in the Senate, we've got some ideas to maybe make it a little better. But number one, I want to grandfather anyone who already has a lifetime plate and wants to keep it. I think it would be wrong to go back on that promise as the state of Michigan. So if you have a fishing boat that you've got a lifetime plate on, that would be grandfathered. But particularly for the commercial, we want to go back to a renewable plate at a very, very competitive cost with all the states around us in this region. And I think that will bring additional dollars for roads and bridges here to the state. It doesn't go as far as what Roy was talking about. We have 2 Schmidts in the, and Wayne's the better looking one. But
Whoa, let's keep it civil. I know the elections are getting everybody's blood boiling. But.
first of all, that was just meant for fun because his twin brother actually is my neighbor, lives right next to me, and so we always play this game where Roy's the better looking, but Rudy got all the brains. Anyway, but that's my answer.
Okay. Senator Kuipers, you want to weigh in on the lame duck issue? Is having as little done as possible the best way to go, and to leave some of the tough problems for our next governor or legislature, or any tough problems you'd like to see tackled in the next 2 months?
I actually think lame duck has the potential to be one of the biggest we've had in a number of years. You have, 31 senators leaving?
At least 29.
At least 29. 29 to 31 senators leaving. You've got probably half of the House that's turning over, plus a governor that's leaving. These next 2 months are legacy time for a lot of people that haven't had a chance to get some of their issues dealt with. So I think the potential is there for a big lame duck. I guess I differ a little bit with what Tom said. Lame duck is not necessarily for new issues. I think we'll be dealing with some issues that we've been talking about for a long, long time in Michigan, but just have not been in a position to get the necessary votes. Things like tenure reform. I think the gas tax issue is going to be one that they're going to take a run at. I see the Senate possibly as the body that stops that from happening unless we get some other things put in place. So I actually think lame duck has the potential to be quite spectacular this time.
On transportation, what are some of those other things you think that need to be put in place to get more sustainable revenue passed?
Well, I think, one, you have to do a complete overhaul of the department. I think they've been horribly mismanaged for a long time. And, part of the problem we find ourselves in right now is under the last two governors, Engler and Granholm, the legislature allowed them to bond forward for building. And so one of the reasons we don't have the money in the fund today is because we're paying so much in interest and bond repayments from past years that it's gobbling up about $600 million a year. Well, you can build a lot of bridges, repair a lot of bridges, build a lot of miles of road with $600 million that right now is going into interest and debt repayment. So we need to make sure that process going forward stops. And I think the engineering standards that Michigan has been using for a long time are not to the same level as the standards used in a lot of other states. The argument has always been, well, Michigan has freeze thaw, and that has a special impact on our roads and their ability to weather and last for long periods of time. We have other states that have the same climate issues that Michigan does: Minnesota, Wisconsin, New York, and yet it seems like when they build a road, it lasts for quite some time. So I've had, and I think others in our caucus have had, pretty direct conversations with people from MIDA and the department saying, listen, this can't be just about raising taxes here in Michigan. We already have the highest gas tax in the region. Can we really afford to go 9 cents higher over the next 3 years? Let's look at some of the other things that could be done to address the issues at hand.
What about another span across the Detroit River? Is that going to be on the agenda?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Is shaking our head good enough?
Okay, no, yes, all right, all over the place, okay.
I would like to go back just to the prior question there, and I do believe that our new congressmen, our senators, when they go back to Washington, even if it's only for 5 years, that we should stop being a donor state for a while and receive dollar back for every dollar we put in until we get our roads back up. Not just necessarily raising taxes here, but we're already paying it in, and we're still a donor to Alaska and some of the southern states. And I think there's certainly a way for us to turn that around, certainly for a period of time. We can't keep borrowing like we did again this year. That's got to stop.
Okay, I'd like to open it up for questions. If you have one right now, raise your hand. One of these. Mr. Varga.
Well, you can't be saying that you don't want to be a donor state if you can't match the federal money that's coming in. So that's one of my concerns. As a former member of the Transportation Funding Task Force, we were looking at not being able to match federal money for roads, bridges, and transit. And if you can't match the dollars, then you're going to be even
Any other questions? I want to ask the panel something, our legislators. A lot of discussion this campaign season is around the MBT, replacing it, removing it, cutting it. From a process standpoint, whether you're going to be there or not, do you think the legislature should craft a replacement before eliminating the MBT, or does it need to be eliminated first to force action?
No, that's what got us in this mess.
I would like to respond. 4 years ago, I walked in, and I actually, when you said, what can we do in terms of the lame duck, I'd like to thank the previous Senate for giving me a 12-month deadline to replace the tax. I mean, that's what they did. They basically said, we're going to eliminate the SBT, and oh, by the way, you got 12 months to fix it. So when I walked in the door, we had 12 months to replace the SBT. I think it's a bad idea. You know, almost ideally, I'd say, yeah, go ahead and do it. Let's, in lame duck, eliminate the SBT and let business know in 12 months it is replaced. But at the same time, we got the MBT out of the SBT because we did that same thing. So I don't think that's the wisest thing. I do want to thank people like the Chamber who have said, we have to redo this, but we have to be much smarter this time around. I think we're much more engaged this time around as a business community. So probably not the best decision to eliminate it and then start trying to replace it. And I think we got to give the governor a chance. You know, he's talking about a corporate income tax or a corporate tax on business. Just so you know, that creates about $500 million if you go to our Senate fiscal agencies and those kinds of people. Right now, the MBD takes in about $2 billion. And so you got a $1.5 billion deficit. So if you're sitting here from a municipality, what do we have, another $1.5 billion deficit? Higher education, community colleges, what are we going to do? So we have to be thinking through that. And then air funding, we have a $1.6 billion deficit in next year's budget with that all drying up. So now you're at $3.1 billion in a deficit with a general fund of about $8 billion. That's pretty serious money. It doesn't mean we can't do it, but we've got some history to make in this coming year. So I don't think we can be just rash about some of this. Some of them sound like really good ideas, but we're going to have to all grow up. We're going to have to learn that there have to be some serious changes in Michigan in this next 12 months. And a lot of you in this room will probably be mad at us 12 months from now. But it's gonna be changes that have to be made. Michigan cannot keep going on the path that we've been on. We are heading for a disaster. You hear our debt. We hear different issues that are coming up. We have to make some serious change. And I think, I think Snyder is going to win this election. I think we're going to have kind of a total makeover to the state of Michigan in the next 12 months. And so let's put our seatbelts on. Let's get ready because it's going to be changes that will come from all of us. No one is going to be probably left scarless in this process. There are going to be changes that happen to each and every one of us. We just passed a 10% pay cut. You don't care, I know, but that's coming. Those are the kinds of things that we have to ask every state employee to give up some of their wages and health benefits and their retirement. Yeah, we did a little bit here, a little bit there, but there are going to have to be some super serious changes in the next 12 months.
Representative Pierce, you wanted to weigh in on that?
Well, I just wanted to add, I agree with everything that Senator Jansen just said, but I would make one caveat to your initial question, and that is, do we just eliminate it and then go after the new? I think that would be a very poor idea, but I do think we should eliminate the surcharge immediately. That has been one of the most onerous add-ons that this state has ever put on job providers. And so I do think the surcharge, and I know the Senate led the campaign to make that happen, the surcharge should go away immediately, but then we ought to vet whatever solution is going to replace the MBT.
No, and I believe that we craft it first. Most of us, several of us, was on that House floor when the MBT was put together in the middle of the night, and you all know what happened. And so, no, we craft it first.
Questions from the audience? Otherwise, I can keep going and have my questions answered. Carl?
What does the surcharge generate?
600 million.
600.
Between 500 and 600 million.
But it's been going down
Right.
From the day it was started because we've been losing jobs. And so the biggest issue for everything that we're talking about is we have got to turn Michigan away from bleeding, as it has been for several years now, to patch that wound and become healing and growing again. And I believe the surcharge was one of the major pieces that has impacted even greater bleeding here in the state of Michigan.
Terry?
Talk to me about term limits and the effect that has on the legislature over the years. I know that's history now, but what do you folks think of it?
What do we think of term limits?
I don't mind jumping in again. And because my position has been consistent, I feel like I'm okay at saying what I'm about to say. First of all, I was against term limits as we have them now. Before I got to Lansing, I've been against them since we've been to Lansing, and I'll be against them when I'm done in Lansing. They are too onerous. They are too short. Here's what's going to happen this year. First of all, let's remember back to 2007. 2007 was probably the worst budget process this state has had in decades. It was just ugly. And I believe one of the main reasons for that was we had a brand new majority leader in the Senate, we had a brand new speaker in the House, and we had brand new chairs of appropriations in both the House and the Senate in 2007. You jump ahead 2 years to 2009, we had the same onerous budget deficits, but we were able to accomplish it in a much better process than we did in 2007. So now let's jump ahead to 2011. You're going to have at least 29 new senators in the Senate. You're going to have a brand new chair of appropriations. You're going to have a brand new majority leader. The Senate is probably, or the House is going to be at least, I believe, half of the House of Representatives is going to be turnover. So you've got almost 50% there, 55 to maybe even up to 60. And then you're going to have a new speaker, and you're going to have a new chair of appropriations there, plus a brand new governor to bring into the picture. It could lead to a very, very challenging budget year next year. So I do believe the term limits are really making somewhat of a negative impact here in the state of Michigan.
Well, this probably isn't a surprise, though, to the institutions, being the House, the Senate, et cetera. Is there anything going on to try and combat all this inexperience, provide some leadership training on this is how you chair appropriations, and is there any of that happening to ease the transition?
In my discussions with who I believe is going to be governor-elect, yes, there are plans to do much of those kind of orientations, particularly for the new legislators. But also, he's going to need to really do an orientation with all the legislators, because it's going to be a whole new vision setting and a whole new direction that this governor wants to take the state.
Roy, do you want to weigh in on the term limits issue?
Yeah. Well, Tom's got a good point, too. I mean, if I get, I'm on policy, and if I was to be placed on appropriations, it'd be a whole new learning curve, would be unbelievably hard to start. I really think I've come a long way in the last year, and then boom, you're on to something else. So term limits, I agree with everything Tom said. In fact, I was a little late driving around a couple times and listening to Kevin Matthews, and this was what the joke was. They went out and they asked who was the candidates for governor, and it was 50-50 on who could answer. I mean, we've seen all the radio ads, TV. That's how many people, 50% could only say who was governor. Here's my point. When that term limits was put in there, it was such a fallacy. I mean, the people decide. I was blessed to serve 16 years on the city commission. And the people decide when they want to take somebody out. They took out a 12-year incumbent, last election. I was fortunate to beat a 12-year incumbent. It's called apathy, and so we put this term limit thing in there thinking that just gave the voters an easy way to, get the bums out. Most of them don't even know who's running for what or who's doing what. So we tried to put some stuff in for term limits, but how can we take it to the voters when our economy is suffering and a lot of bad decisions were made, and I'm saying on both sides. I'm not here saying it in a partisan way at all. So it needs to be changed because we need people with some type of experience to be able to handle these really tough issues. And one other comment, Senator Jansen, who I respect immensely, says it best. We need to grow up and all work together because if I'm elected next year, these decisions this year were nothing compared to what we're going to have to make. And from my perspective, we really, with all these new people coming in, it's going to be quite a challenge.
Representative Boer, then Jansen.
Yes, well, to that, I would say in 1992, I voted for it. And I was concerned that chairmans had more power than the governor, and I was one of those that voted for that. But after seeing what's happened, I don't think we take term limits off, we just move them up and make them 12 years or 14 years and see where that goes. We need to cap it and keep it capped, but I think we need to try it with a 12 or 14 years.
Senator Jansen.
Just to answer your question, is there training or anything done? Yes. Senate Fiscal Agency, House Fiscal Agency, the MSU Public Policy Forum, or whatever they call that. Jackson, you know what that is. Whoever they are, they put on a training every day. They do a two-day training. They bring in former legislators. Many times we as legislators will mentor somebody coming in. So there are all kinds of things happening below the radar screen that average citizens aren't going to see. So we're not stupid about this. We try to get everybody equipped and ready to go as soon as possible. And so I do think, to answer that question, there is a lot going on.
What's the one piece of advice you give to a newly elected state representative or state senator?
Could I go back?
No, go ahead.
To the prior
Go ahead.
question?
Sure.
In the training, I can tell you in 2005, and I took on the chairmanship of community college, they set Jerry Coyman right beside me. That was a training process right there. There was our training. Jerry Coyman is the vice chair of community college. He had the experience, so that's where we got our training. So for that.
I would say in answer to your question, the best advice you can give is don't be afraid to ask questions, because you will have a lot of them. And you know, term limits, especially on the House side, are really too short. You spend most of your time running for re-election or running for a leadership position which you're not qualified to take because you really, I mean, I think, speaking for myself, I don't know what Mark's time frame was like, but I felt like I didn't really hit my stride until I got into the Senate, because then I sort of knew who the players were, what policy implications were. So ask a lot of questions and don't be afraid to ask questions, I guess would be the advice I would give.
Yes, Rich.
I got a question about that. Where's the political will to make a change? It would seem like the legislature itself are kind of hamstrung with that, because if you want to do anything about it, it's like it'll be due to self-interest by a lot of people. Where does the impetus come to make a change that has any chance of?
Well, it should come from groups like the Chamber leading a coalition to collect signatures and get it on the ballot. You know, I think if the legislature, it's going to have to be voted on by the people eventually. I think if the legislature puts it in front of the voters, they'll vote it down. If there's a popular citizen-led initiative to get it on the ballot, it has a chance of passing, even though when it's polled, 65% of the people still support term limits.
Other questions? Eric.
You know, this goes back to something that Representative Smith touched on earlier, is bipartisanship. Senator Jansen, you sponsored the Michigan Job Training Program, and that's, you know, and I know Senator Hyder, you're working on it right now in the Education Committee, and that has generated millions of dollars of workforce investment fund for training for companies creating new jobs, and it has significant bipartisan support. I think that's what made it work. What other issues, or are there any issues, where you can generate bipartisan support to get things through? I think a lot of times you get, are there any issues out there that both sides of the camp say, let's do this?
For those maybe in the back, the question was, what issues are out there that generate bipartisan support so we can get something done?
I'll quick answer at least on the budget side of things. I'm on appropriations, and that same chairman that chairs my D-Leg budget on the House side, Rick Hamill. So our budget process is the same way. We do the same thing. We meet ahead of time. We work through the issues. We talk through the issues. Folks, this is just communication. You do it at work. We have to do it at our work. And we just sit down and we work through the issues. And if there's 2 or 3 or 5 things that we have to work on, we work on them. And we bring in other people. So a lot of that happens. You just don't read about it. You read about so-and-so who gets mad at such and such and they throw something at them or whatever that happens to be. There are so many people that work together inside the legislature that you're not going to hear about because it doesn't make the media. It's not going to make the media. We don't want it to make the media. It's like you do in your day job. So there's a lot of that goes on. A lot of the projects or legislation you see happening. The first question is, who else is looking at it on the other side of the aisle? Many of us will ask that question because under today's world, you need bipartisanship to pass anything. In this first 4 years in office for me, it had to be bipartisan because you had a governor Democrat and a House that was run by Democrats. So you had to do that. That was just the nature of the beast.
Peva?
Yeah, I have a question about how you fight the department itself, I mean the state itself, because I'm a mortgage broker and I'm licensed by DLEG and Ofer. We have our own budget that isn't set by appropriations, although it goes through there if they want more employees, things like that. And I see them in self-preservation. Last year was the first year that we had our fees increased from $2 a loan to $20 a loan with a 15-day notice. This year we've gotten hints that we're going to pay the maximum fees available because our industry has shrunk to the point that there's hardly any of us left, from 3,000 licensed loan officers from 40,000. So when you look at that and we go up there and we try to see the reason behind that, they have a department with 30 people to, monitor what, 4,000 people? So how do you, and you mentioned transportation being, out of control, how does the legislature come back to rein in the people that have been up there forever that set those budgets and won't move people because there's job security? And I heard from the commissioner himself who said they won't fire or let go anybody, they just shift them to a different department.
So how do we get better legislative oversight over the departments? Maybe is that linked to term limits? How do we create a culture that's going to support a great business environment?
Well, I think the legislature lost its ability to do that when term limits was implemented. There are many legislators who've had conversations with department heads, and the department head's response was, well, we're not going to tell you, and if you don't like it, tough, you'll be gone, we'll still be here. Okay? Plus, with time comes wisdom, and wisdom gives you the ability to ask questions the right way. Because a department head who's been at it for a while will answer your question, but they won't answer the intent. Okay, and sometimes it's the intent where the message needs to be delivered. And so
Other responses
I think
to
term limits has certainly hurt that.
legislative oversight of departments?
Yeah, and that has to be one of the first things that the new governor does. I mean, we have no accountability and oversight. I mean, that is part of our problem down there. You look at the community health budget and Department of Human Services and Corrections. How can you close 12 prisons in the state of Michigan? Your budget's up $100 million. I mean, come on. So, but you don't have that because, as they say, that the people who are in committee chairs haven't been there long enough to understand it. So we have to bring that in with our new governor.
Other comments on that, Senator?
One quickie. The other thing you have to do is in these budgets, when you make the cuts, like we're just going through, whatever, 5% cuts or whatever, I always push it back onto the department. I make sure the cut goes to a Lansing address in the department, because the first thing that departments like to do is say, well, I'm going to cut to my local providers out there in all the counties. Well, that's where the services are being, given to our citizens. And so the departments back in Lansing love to just cut that. So the first thing I've always done is my cuts go to their address of their main office, because once you start cutting them, now they have to look across the table and say, Jane or Joe, I got to let you go. Now all of a sudden they take on a totally different attitude in a department. And so that's probably, for me, one of the most successful ways of getting the department to kind of wake up and respond to the kinds of things that you're talking about.
Mr. McLogan.
I wonder if any of the panelists would be willing to predict some election outcomes. Who controls the Senate, who controls the House? And what does it mean for the new governor if there is a split control or if one party takes both chambers?
I get the Senate. The Senate will win again. How's that? The Republicans, we're looking at 24 seats right now, and we're at 22. The Republican wave is pretty strong, and so on a very good day, 24-ish. But the House, I'm going to have to let the House members respond. But in response to the other question, I think this governor sounds, and again, I predict Snyder, he's 20 points up, or whatever, even if it's 18. In 8 days, Mr. Bonero has a lot of work to do. And so I think for Snyder, it's probably going to be okay for him. That's what he's selling. That's what he's talking about. So I think he will, it seems to me, he's talking bipartisan all the time anyway. So I think he'll probably be fine with that. For myself, I think I would rather have more of a Republican House, just so some of these reforms that we've been fighting, the House has stopped many times, or the surcharge elimination, we passed that twice in the Senate. That's not happened in the House. I'd love to see some change over there that would allow those kinds of things to be passed.
Representatives, who wants to prognosticate on the outcome of November 2?
I'll jump in first and then give Roy
Equal time?
equal time.
Okay.
If you looked at the polls that were done last week throughout the state, it is assumed that had the election happened last week, the House would be at least at a 55-55. That's what the polls were saying. The reason I'm telling it to you that way is who knows what happens in these last 8 days? Who knows who gets engaged in some of the specific campaigns and has an impact that can change them. But for the Republicans to get more than the 55 and actually take majority, it requires several incumbents on the Democrat side to lose their jobs, and that's a challenge. That is a tough place to be, because if you've been a smart representative, you have worked hard back in your district, much like a Roy has done for his district. And so I don't anticipate Roy losing his seat, but there are some that may, and I believe it will be a much narrower margin. I'm just not sure who's going to end up on top and who's going to be in the minority.
Well, Roy, do you want to respond to the prediction that you're going to win on November 2?
No, I was just going to say, I could take contributions. Thanks, Tom. Very tight race. He is right on. This is the benefit of, I don't know, there might be one benefit from term limits. So when you're a freshman, you're asked to do things that I think somebody 10 years down the line would be like raising money and walking all over the state for their candidates, which I enjoy doing and want to do. And so I have a pretty good handle too, and it is neck and neck. It's these last 8 days. I mean, he is right on the polling. We are at 50-50, give or take on either side a couple. I just think we've been outspent, and that's just the way it goes. Some years you outspend the other side. Sometimes they outspend us. It's not a knock on anything. It's just reality. So we are fighting to keep that. But I think what Andy Dillon did is give us a big lead. And so, yeah, we're going to get knocked down quite a bit. And I think it's, down the road it's going to be a good thing, because no matter what way it comes out, we're going to have to, what I've wanted to do for a long time is actually negotiate in good faith and get something done for Michigan, and not have to say, oh, here comes term limit, or what do you call this net coming up?
Lame duck.
Lame duck, sorry, just a rookie. Here comes lame duck, and now we got to make all these big decisions. That is crap. I mean, we're elected to make tough decisions. So to specifically answer the question, I think we're going to keep the House, but it's going to be tight, and it's going to be, from my perspective, who Senator Jansen just mentioned, I would support Rick Hamill, who really gets what's called bipartisanship, and we'll work together. So, but it's going to be tough, and it's going to come down the next who wants it a little bit more.
Any other predictions, surprises to expect from November 2? Okay. Other questions? Carl.
One of the most important things the governor does is make appointments. What are the key appointments, and where do you think he's looking for people to fill particular positions?
Key appointments for the next governor to make.
Well, it depends on how many departments he wants to have. So he's got to come to that recognition first. He's talked about streamlining and making wholesale changes to how government operates. In my mind, that means you're going to change the makeup of state government and what departments look like. And so I think that the first decision he needs to make is, what is my department structure going to look like? How many departments will I have? And then he can go forward and decide, who he wants as department heads.
How many appointments does he make in a particular department?
I've got the answer to that.
Tom?
I just hosted a transition workshop last week. So there are 5 in each of the departments. So it's the department heads. And again, Senator Kuipers is absolutely right. It depends on how many departments he decides to have. But there are 5 positions within each department. Back to the question about bureaucracy, the other piece of this is some of those positions that he may choose to appoint are currently held by somebody protected through civil service. If that's the case, what happens in those situations is the civil service person isn't fired. They are removed from that position so that an appointed position can come in, but then they find an equal position for that civil service individual somewhere else, either in that department or another. There lies part of the challenge of reining in the bureaucracy. The Civil Service Commission was established back in the 1940s, and the rules that they were established under haven't changed since the 1940s. And clearly, that's something that I think the next governor needs to look at. Not to eliminate it, because there's a good reason to have the Civil Service Commission. Prior to the commission, when a new governor came in, everybody changed, and it became extremely partisan at that point in time. So the commission makes sense to a certain degree to protect the state from partisanship going amok throughout the bureaucracy. But it's under rules that no longer fit a 21st century government.
We have another question over here.
Well, I find what you're saying is very intriguing, especially what Senator Kuiper started out with. How do you make a bureaucracy or a department better? Senator Jansen, suppose Governor Snyder appoints me to be head of NDOT, and I try to do there what I do here, which is run government like a business. I don't see how I can run that government like a business without some effective way of managing the people who are in that department and also having some policy direction that fundamentally changes things. Because you end up wanting to do that, and then you're hamstrung by all these, the employees will not do what you want. You don't have a transportation commission that establishes the right kind of policy. There has to be significant change to be able to run government like a business, which I can't do, but I don't see how you can do it in the state. So that's my question to you.
How do you run government like a business?
You put into place to make that happen?
I think there's obstacles in any business that you're in. When I was back in business 12, 14 years ago, it didn't always run smoothly, but good leaders figure out a way around the obstacles and find a strategy that gets things done. So, sometimes I think we make that an excuse. My hope would be that we'd get people in the right places that are able to confront the tough issues and move forward. But first and foremost, you have to have a willingness to do it. And I think for a good chunk of the last 8 years, there hasn't been a willingness to do that.
Senator?
Just quickly, you just mentioned Transportation Commission. DLEG, I have the unemployment and the workers' comp boards that are appointments. I can tell you a governor who's ready to make some appointments that are serious about being more business oriented. I can tell you I spent 4 years as chair of DLEG on this workers' comp board trying to make sure the governor didn't appoint the wrong kinds of people. It was always a fight with them, and we ended up getting kind of a mix 50-50, which ended up being okay but not great. And so it is starting from the top, and it is kind of rebuilding, and it's going to need a director of transportation along with those appointments, but then also committees in the Senate and the House who are saying, yes, here's our plan. So maybe it's time for that group of people to sit down in a room and say, in the next 4 years, we need to accomplish the following so that we are all on the same page. To me, that is what was probably intended years and years and years ago, but we've lost that. So if you are the new director, then you better be calling this transportation chair in the House and Senate, and the governor and that group of people ought to be saying, here's our plan. That has to happen in every department in lots of different levels. So it's going to take a lot of work.
Speaking of legislative oversight, the state is working on recommendations to implement federal health care reform. To your knowledge, what's the legislative oversight been as far as those recommendations go, and how the state's going to try to comply with the upcoming regulations for federal health care reform? Okay.
Right off, I don't know of any business. I have to think about that a little bit. But your answer question that you just had was DCH, whoever is going to be really overseeing that. Medicaid is now demanding certain things from us as a state. We've got really some federal demands coming down on us, and now we can't do reform because of this national health care. We wanted to take away benefits for 19 and 20-year-olds that are able-bodied. Now you can't do that because you didn't have that before. So now the reforms we wanted to do, now we can't do. And there are costs already coming. And so we have said, why am I going to spend this money on these kinds of things which we don't want? So it is going to take a little bit of I'll say rabble-rousing by the new Department of Community Health and anybody connected with that, again, committees, and find anything possible to try to repeal it. And it's going to take our congressional delegations to go in there and say, we have to do things differently, and do the states have the power to make any of these changes? So our new attorney general will have to be part of that also.
And to the question, though, what kind of support do you want to see from the business community going forward, whether it's tough decisions like federal health care reform or on the budget? How do we provide you cover for tough decisions? I mean, a lot of the questions have been about how do we get political will to move things forward? What can the business community do better to provide that support?
Well, I think if the business community makes it personal and shares with the public how the changes in the federal law will impact their business and their ability to create jobs, that information out in the mainstream is always good, okay? Because it helps legislators who say, you know what, this is about jobs and creating jobs, and if we're going in this direction, we're going to see this job loss. If we change it, we can see this job growth. So, I mean, I think from a business standpoint, you have to make it personal and let people know how the policy decisions impact your bottom line and your ability to create jobs.
Representative Brewer, you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I think everyone is sitting back watching as this 2,000 pages or 2,800 pages worth of health care plan comes out. I think nobody really is moved on anything very seriously yet because they're watching it. But I do know from the community health budget now that it's $14 billion, $100 million, almost equal to K-12 budget. $10 billion in the Medicaid line. $10 billion, and we get $2.2 billion as fraud and misappropriations, and we've got to get a handle on all of that, and we need to get a handle on it very quickly before we flow a lot of more money in through that account, so that line. So I think the reason no one's answering that very clearly for anybody today is because of that. I mean, we're watching it just like you are, and what's going to come first.
Representative Schmidt?
Yeah. Specifically on that question, Andy, how can the business community help? I think a lot of people come and they want major change or they want things done, but yet there's very little support to back up a tough decision. So an example from my perspective would be the business leaders plan, which I support for eliminating the MVT and surcharge and doing retail tax on services. Hey, we have to do something. But when I supported that, what you've also seen is that the business leaders of Michigan put out ads and educate. It's almost, when you said, like, going back to this, 50% of the people don't know off the street don't know who's running for governor. It's called education, and so I appreciate the support that they were educating at least of our situation and of a plan that might help us come out of this mess we're in. So from my perspective, the support. A lot of times the chamber supports things like a gas tax. I'm not putting anybody on the spot, but educating why and how many jobs we're going to lose if we don't match that federal funding. It's those kind of things. I don't want to raise taxes, but we need to get out of this mess.
Senator?
Well, I think not the health care, but I think come back to the Michigan business tax. I want the solution to be a partnership with business in Michigan telling us, because the last process was the big three and some big guys really ran the MBT. This time I want everybody playing in this game, but I want business in general to say, okay, this makes sense now this time around. We can't do what happened last time. It has to be a bigger partnership. I think this new governor, I think, wants to do that. So if we're going to be successful this time around, I don't want to hear the day after it passed, oh, everybody likes it, that's up in this higher level, monster companies, large companies, but everybody below that hates it. We can't do that this time around. This time it has to be a partnership with business in general. And I don't know how to do that because, you've got all these different groups that represent all these different kinds of companies. And I can look around here and you've all got probably somebody who represents you. Those groups are all going to be tugging in that process. But we have to figure out this time around what business tax is going to work and what's going to be fair, what's flatter, what's, whatever happens to be. But we have to do this much smarter this time around.
Yes.
I guess I'd just like to say that a few years ago, there was the SBT. A lot of people didn't like it. And so someone came along and said, we're going to change it to the Michigan business tax, the MBT. A lot of people don't like it now either. The new one has to be less than the old one. If you just spread the money around and tax different groups of people in favor of others, you haven't accomplished anything for businesses in Michigan. The net money coming into the government under the new tax, whatever it is, has to be less than the old one, or you haven't accomplished anything. It might only be my opinion, but ultimately, you have to reduce the taxes if you want Michigan to be a friendly state to business.
Well, when the MBT is collecting less than the SBT, okay? And so,
Going up for a lot of people, though.
well, but we're still collecting less under the MBT. And so, like Mark said, it was a huge shift from manufacturing to the service sector. And probably the biggest shift came in the personal property tax exemption, because manufacturing has a huge personal property tax liability where most service industries don't. So, a business tax is going to impact different segments of the business community in different ways. I think the goal needs to be to inflict the least amount of harm you can.
Do you think personal property tax should also be part of this next tax discussion? Maybe eliminate that for all businesses? Yes is over here. Roy, nod, shake.
I don't know.
The problem you're going to run into is the personal property tax stays local. So if you don't have a mechanism to replace that funding for your local governments, you're putting them in a huge bind. So, I think all of us would say, yeah, let's get rid of the personal property tax. But you've got mayors like Mayor Buck over here who's saying, hey, wait a minute, that comes out of our bottom line. So what do you do to replace that revenue for your locals?
All right, maybe time for just one last question, Lodi.
At this very late date, what is your intelligence about
Con isn't a non-starter. We got a thumbs down over here. Anybody
Well,
want to comment?
Just based on that, who's running for governor, it's probably gonna go down. That's not on anybody's radar screen, as far as I'm concerned.
I think it goes down also, but going back to that whole term limits discussion we had earlier, there's one opportunity to look at that and possibly make a change. But based on all the things that also could get put in there with it, it scares me too much to be excited about it.
I gotta interject, is John Logie here? Because I tell you
Yeah,
what, he
he's
beat me up
loaded.
if
I see it. He's got a
He is
CC
big
on
on that con. He told me what to say last week, so I was make sure. He wasn't here. Eric, don't tell him. I said.
If you need to find out more about the con, we do have more of that on the Grand Rapids Chambers website. Maybe just one last, maybe two last rapid fire questions. Senator Jansen pointed out that we're facing maybe $1.6 billion deficit next year to $3.1 billion. One reform you'd recommend that the next governor work to implement to help tackle the red ink? Start with Roy. We work down. What's one reform
Well,
you'd want to
I
see
think-
implemented?
I think the biggest thing we need to tackle is this tax structure, because I've said it and somebody else has said it. You are a new business, you're looking to come in the right place, or whoever's talking to you, and they say, what's the surcharge? I mean, that's just absolutely crazy. We have to reform the tax system. To me, that's number one, to get business in here and people to make decisions that they want to come to Michigan.
What about reducing the budget deficit? Any reforms? Yep, Senator Jansen.
I think legacy costs are our issue, and I have an 80-20. Everybody has to pay at least 20% of their health care in state government is my bill. And that is a constitutional amendment also with it. That would impact every public servant in the state of Michigan. Colleges, local governments, people will be mad at us, but at the end of the day, that is a lot of money. It's a lot of money from day one until forever. And we have to do that. That's what the big three have done. We have to do that at the state level for sure. That's $700 million or so a year. And so you want to get structural repairs, that's the beginning of it.
Great. I think that just about does it for us. Let's thank all of our legislators for attending. Just a couple of quick announcements. This is the last public policy breakfast. Thank you to everybody who bought season passes for this year. We'll have season passes being offered to you for every breakfast next cycle. We also have a healthcare reform summit coming up. What businesses need to know regarding federal healthcare reform. A lot of big things that you need to plan for. That's going to be November 19th. Flyers are out there. You can register on the Chamber's website. If you parked in the ramp and didn't get one of the yellow cards, staff will have that as you exit. Thank you again to Fair State University for hosting us, and everybody have a great day.